Hi, my name is Lila Berkman, and I represent the Minnesota Department of Health Federal Triage Department. The purpose of this training is to review the most recent revisions made to the Chapter 5 State Operations Manual. The objectives of this training is to gain a better understanding of the F609 reporting requirements, how those changes will affect the reporting process, as well as the changes made to the federal triage process. Homes are required to send the following types of incidences to the state survey agency. All alleged violations involving abuse, neglect, exploitation, or mistreatment, including injuries of unknown source and misappropriation of resident property. The results of all facility investigations involving alleged violations of abuse, neglect, exploitation, or mistreatment, including injuries of unknown source and misappropriation of resident property, and any reasonable suspicions of crimes against nursing home residents. The facility must provide in its report sufficient information to describe the alleged violation and indicate how residents are being protected. Reporting of alleged violations can be found under F609. It is important that the facility provide as much information as possible to the best of its knowledge at the time of submission of the report so that state agencies can initiate action necessary to oversee the protection of nursing home residents. Current nursing home incident reporting is being revised to reflect the changes to the initial report, which include the addition of the date, time, name when staff became aware of the incident, addition of the date, time the nursing home administrator was notified of the incident and by whom, the current location of the alleged victim, such as was the resident discharged, if so, where, were they hospitalized, if so, which hospital. It must include the alleged perpetrator and their specific title or position. Contact information for the alleged perpetrator. Who made the allegation and relationship to the alleged victim? Were other agencies notified? If so, identify the date, time, and to whom it was reported to, such as the Ombudsman's Office, law enforcement, or any other agency. Agencies could include the medical examiner, Board of Nursing, and Board of Medical Practice, for example. It also must include the description of change in residents' behavior, which is different from their normal baseline related to any psychosocial changes. Witnesses, including their position and title within the facility. The report must also include all steps taken immediately to ensure the resident and/or residents are protected. Such steps could include the immediate assessment of the alleged victim and provision of medical treatment as necessary. Evaluation of whether the alleged victim feels safe, and if he or she does not feel safe, what immediate steps were taken to protect the resident, such as a room relocation and/or increased supervision. The immediate notification of the alleged perpetrator, if a resident, and/or the alleged victim's physician and the resident's representative when there is injury, a significant change in condition or status, and/or a need to alter treatment significantly. If the alleged perpetrator is facility staff, the removal of the alleged perpetrator's access to the alleged victim and other residents, and assurance that ongoing safety and protection is provided for the alleged victim as well as the other residents. If the alleged perpetrator is a resident or visitor, removal of the alleged perpetrator's access to the alleged victim and, as appropriate, other residents, and assurance that ongoing safety and protection is provided for the alleged victim and other residents. Other measures the facility is taking to prevent further potential abuse, neglect, exploitation, and misappropriation of resident property must also be included on the report. If the state agency receives information that a suspected crime may have occurred in a facility and there is indication that it has not been reported, or the state agency cannot verify that a report was made to law enforcement, then the state agency forwards the information from the initial report immediately to law enforcement. The state agency must follow applicable laws and regulations related to information disclosures, privacy, and confidentiality as it makes those referrals. When notification is made to the law enforcement by the facility, the report must include the name of the entity reported to, name of the law enforcement contact person, who reported to law enforcement, the date and time the report was made, any copies of the report made to law enforcement, if available, what information was conveyed to law enforcement, and a police report number provided by law enforcement. Now we'll review priority determinations. When reviewing each individual intake, in cases where the initial report indicates the following, the state agency must initiate an on-site survey within 3 business days of receipt of the initial report. An immediate jeopardy would be any alleged noncompliance which may have caused or may likely cause serious injury, harm, impairment, or death to a resident, and the facility has not implemented adequate protection for all residents, or the state agency has not received sufficient evidence to conclude that residents are adequately protected. In cases where the initial report indicates the following, the state agency must initiate an on-site survey within 7 business days of receipt of the initial report. If the alleged noncompliance may have caused or may likely cause serious injury, harm, impairment, or death to a resident, and the facility has potentially implemented adequate protection for all residents, it is very important to identify any protective measures taken at the time of the initial report. Non-immediate jeopardy high is the alleged noncompliance may have caused actual physical and/or psychosocial harm to the resident. The state agency must initiate an on-site survey with an annual average of 15 business days of receipt of the initial report and not to exceed 18 business days. For non-IJ medium level reports, the facility reported incidences are assigned medium priority if the alleged noncompliance with one or more requirements caused no actual physical and/or psychosocial harm, but there is the potential for more than minimal harm to the resident, and the facility has not provided an adequate response to the allegation, or it is not known whether the facility provided an adequate response. For complaints and facility reported incidences that are assigned a medium priority, the state agency must initiate an on-site survey within 45 days of receipt of the initial report. Non-IJ low priority level. Intakes are assigned a low priority if the alleged noncompliance with one or more requirements may have no actual harm with the potential for minimal harm. State agencies must track trend for potential focus areas during the next on-site survey or initiate a new complaint survey if a trend has been identified. In cases where the state agency has noted a pattern of similar complaints, CMS expects state agencies to prioritize complaints at the appropriate level that is warranted. The timeframes and section 5075 of the Chapter 5 SOM represent maximum timeframes for investigation. However, the state agency is not precluded from investigating complaints and facility-reported incidences within a shorter time frame if a significant pattern is identified. In addition, the state agency is not precluded from taking other factors into consideration in its triage decision. For example, the state agency may identify a trend in allegation that indicates an increased risk of harm to residents, or the state agency may receive corroborating information from other complainants regarding the allegation. This slide represents the maximum timeframes the state agency must follow for on-site investigations. As you can see, for nursing home complaints, the state agency must initiate an on-site survey within 3 business days of receipt of the initial report for immediate jeopardy priority level. For nursing home incident reports, if adequate protection is noted in the report, an on-site must be initiated within 7 days of receipt of the report. However, if the report does not identify sufficient protective measures, the on-site will occur within 3 business days. Depending on the nature of the allegation, the facility would be expected to take immediate action to ensure the protection of residents. Information provided by the facility may assist the state agencies in determining whether there are potentially adequate protection provided to the residents. Example of such information could include, but is not limited to, the monitoring of the alleged victim and other identified residents who are at risk, such as conducting unannounced management visits at different times and different shifts. Evaluation of whether the alleged victim feels safe, and if she or he does not feel safe, taking immediate steps to alleviate the fear, such as a room relocation, increased supervision, providing social services, such as emotional support and counseling to the resident as needed. Immediate assessment of the alleged victim and provision of medical treatment as necessary. Provision of goods and/or services that are necessary to avoid serious injury, harm, impairment, or death to a resident. When speaking of increasing supervision, one-to-one supervision is not sustainable. We would expect to see a plan if further monitoring is required after the initial 40-hour observation window. Immediate notification of the alleged victim's physician and the resident's representative when there is an injury or a change in the condition or status. If the alleged perpetrator is staff removal, if the alleged perpetrator is staff removal of if the alleged perpetrator is staff removal of access by the alleged perpetrator to the alleged victim and other residents, and assurance that ongoing safety and protection is provided for the alleged victim and other residents. If the alleged perpetrator is a resident or visitor, we would expect to see the removal of access by the alleged perpetrator to the alleged victim and, as appropriate, other residents, and assurance that ongoing safety and protection is provided for the alleged victim as well as other residents. Notification of the alleged violation to other agencies or law enforcement authorities within timeframes as specified in the Chapter 5 SOM or state law. Whether administrative staff, including the administrator, were informed and involved as necessary in the investigation. Below are examples that indicate that a resident may not be protected in the facility. The alleged perpetrator continues to have access to the alleged victim and/or other residents. Retaliation occurs against a resident who reports an alleged violation. A resident who repeatedly fondles other residents is moved to another unit, where he or she continues to exhibit the same behaviors to other residents. And a resident with a history of striking a resident is left unsupervised with a resident who has been targeted in the past. Following the submission of the initial report, the facility has 5 days to submit a thorough investigation. And for all alleged violations of abuse, neglect, exploitation, or mistreatment, including injuries of unknown source and misappropriation of resident property, the facility is required to submit a report of the results of the investigation within 5 working days to the state agency. Within 5 working days of the incident, the facility must provide in its report sufficient information to describe the results of the investigation and indicate any corrective actions taken if the allegation was verified. It is important that the facility provide as much information as possible to the best of its knowledge at the time of the submission of the initial report. The investigation report should include any updates to information provided in the initial report and any following subsequent additional information obtained during the investigation, which should include, but is not limited to, the following: the 5-day investigative report must provide a detailed summary of all steps taken to investigate the allegation. It should include interviews with the alleged perpetrator, the victim, witnesses, the supervisor, and victim's responsible party. It must identify any signs of adverse psychosocial reaction. It should include pertinent investigation facts. It should identify a conclusion, whether it was verified, not verified, or inconclusive. It should identify any corrective actions taken. And if a systemic problem was identified, what actions were taken following the identification of the systemic failure, and identify the steps that have been taken to address those systems. And lastly, it must identify the primary person who conducted the investigation. In conclusion, please take the time to review these steps prior to submitting the initial and/or the 5-day investigative reports. Ensure each report includes the pertinent information and thoroughly identifies any actions taken which allow the state agency to assign the most appropriate priority level to each individual intake received. Again, my name is Lila Berkman. I can be reached at Lila, Lyla, Berkman, BURKMAN at state.mn.us. Thank you.